Hello,
Great.
everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations with thought leaders of the world. Today, we are privileged to have a distinguished guest, Shri Sathiya Moorthy, one of our ablest veteran journalists, a leading expert on Sri Lanka and Maldives, and also a prolific writer on matters relating to India and abroad. This is a time when Sri Lanka is going through an unprecedented crisis, which has major implications for India and probably the world itself. I could not think of any other person than Sri Sathiya Moorthy to tell us all about what is happening in Sri Lanka. This has been going on for a long time, and there are many, many factors about which he has been writing. So, welcome, Sri Sathiya Moorthy, to this conversation.
Good evening, sir. Thank you.
Well, I'm not an economist, but reading through all the material that I have seen in your writings and what you have sent me today from the IMF, etc., I can only think in terms of what Shakespeare said: neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend. That may be the best advice we can give to every country, any country in the world, particularly to Sri Lanka. They have borrowed beyond their means, and they have progressively come to a situation where it has become intolerable for them and the people. Sri Lanka was a very prosperous island. Even before we opened our economy to the world, Sri Lanka was an open economy and a prosperous one at that. And many of us used to go to Sri Lanka for our international shopping. From that to this day, when they are struggling to run their country, struggling to maintain their people, and refugees started moving out of Sri Lanka. It's a pathetic situation. So, what is the fundamental reason? There are several reasons. This title that we gave is BRI. Is Sri Lanka the victim of BRI? That is one question we have in mind, but there may be many others. So, what would you think are the main factors which led to this situation?
Thank you, President, for that comprehensive question. Sri Lanka is a victim of all three factors that could go wrong with any economy. On the one side, they were victims of market economy when introduced in the late 70s. Their agrarian economy basically is an agrarian economy, and it was nearly destroyed by importing milk powder of all things from Australia and New Zealand. When they were producing fresh milk every day, they were importing milk, and became a culture, urban culture, and identified with the urban culture.
This started with which year was this?
1978, and J.R. Jayawardena was the president. His party UNP is a market capitalism oriented. Before that, there was socialists of the SLFP, his rival Bandar Naike kind. This alternator. That was the destruction of the domestic economy began there. Then came BRI in the form of Chinese funding from the so-called left, if you want to call it a liberal Chinese economy. That destroyed the forex issue.
But it was known then that this would be a debt trap, isn't it? Many countries already predicted that the BRI would amount to a debt trap for many countries. That was predicted. And how come Sri Lanka did not take note of it?
Well, Sri Lanka was among the first to fall into that debt trap in this part of the world. And they did not take it because there are a few factors. One, in this social media generation, which began even 20 years back, there was this aspirational generation, and Sri Lankan successive rulers in Sri Lanka have been anticipating trouble if they do not address the demands and the expectations of this aspirational generation. So they went on borrowing to give new roads, all those things. So if you look at the BRI investments in Sri Lanka, it was basically infrastructure oriented. And the negative part, infrastructure is fine as long as you can boost the economy to repay the debt. That did not happen. One. Two, unlike, say, for instance, China, India is going in a big way now. When China, wherever China went, China took even its labor. See, every country takes about 40-50% of the material. The rest of it, they support the local economy by
The
purchasing.
Chinese send their people, as they happened in Tanzania, it happened in Kenya and many places.
Precisely. So, for the past nearly 10-20 years, the local labor market was dried up. And as circumstances would have it during pandemic, whatever Sri Lankan, substantial number of Sri Lankans were working overseas and they were sending internal remittances, they came back, that remittances dried up, and they are also sitting at home unemployed. Right?
And even before BRI, even before these developments, there was also the civil war situation. How has that affected the economy?
This the civil war, the LTT war, affect the economy definitely, particularly after the LTT bombed the Katanayake airport and created a panic in the investors and economic community. But that was only up to a point. Basically, the problem is it is not only true of Sri Lanka but also other India's neighbors. None of them is a manufacturing economy in a big way, as big a way as their economies demand. Say, maybe you can say Bangladesh has got a textile jute, etc., etc. But that is not enough to address the demands of the economy and the new population, new generation population. So they go on to, by borrowing to spend, and that destroyed Sri Lanka's economy.
No,
And
but the
this
borrowing from external sources started many years ago. And
Yes.
this was building up. And the percentage of the GDP that they had to pay just for servicing the debt was growing even before the pandemic, wasn't it?
Yes, precisely. This is what my point is also. Many political analysts, both inside the country and outside the country, blame the Rajapaksa, particularly Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the present president, for the situation. For him, it is a legacy issue. He inherited that mess, which has also partly contributed by his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa, now Prime Minister, when he was president for 10 long years. That was when the BRI investments came into Sri Lanka. That actually boosted the GDP during the second half of the war years, in his second term. But that had a reverse impact, which the nation is feeling now. And aggravated by the pandemic.
And the pandemic,
Just let me
the basic reason was the stopping of the flow of tourists. That was supposed to be the major income for them. And that completely shut down. Wasn't that a reason?
Yes. Tourism, inward remittances by Sri Lankans working abroad, and export of garments and tea. All four were totally shut down during the pandemic. Tourism got affected even before it, as early as April, May 2019, after the Easter blast occurred, where about 40-45 foreigners were also killed. That pushed a panic situation, and tourism stopped overnight. Just as it was picking up, the pandemic came.
And the bombing, this Easter Sunday bomb terrorist attack, that also came just before the pandemic, did it?
Yes, 1 year before the pandemic, 1.5 years pandemic, before the pandemic. That happened on April 21, 2019. But that robbed the nation of the tourist income even before pandemic struck. And the government of the day was making a lot of effort to bring back tourists, and it was starting to show results when pandemic struck. It was a complete lockdown across the world. There was no question of tourism and forex.
And the GDP is supposed to have contracted by about 36%, according to IMF.
Yes. Today the borrowings is 116% of the GDP. So those figures do not matter anymore to Sri Lanka for some more time until they are able to put the house in order and before going back to look at these figures and try to do something about them. But that is a little far away. Not now.
But the deficit has always been there and it kept on increasing. And it became about 10% of the GDP at one point, before, even just after the pandemic. What do you think?
Definitely. Because one thing we have to remember, even before this government came to power, that is Gota Rajapaksa came to power in 2019, late 2019, they had a problem with the revenues and forex and etc. With the result, the previous government itself had begun approaching the IMF. So it is a legacy issue this man inherited, and he also added to the mess. To be fair to his critics, he slashed the duties and taxes, possibly with the eye on the parliamentary elections in 2020, and
Right.
during the pandemic, the entire revenue collections contested, and that became a bigger issue. Then came other similar such other issues, like it's announcing organic farming without providing for organic fertilizer availability in the big way.
Yes.
And when
Can you
you
explain
import
that?
them from
Sri Moorthy, can you explain that organic thing? Because it doesn't sound very credible that such a thing would have created so much devastation. Everybody is
exactly,
moving into organic these days.
this, but you have to move it with a lot of preparations. The
And
president
here they
announced
were
organic
importing
farming.
all the organic stuff from China and then they discouraged all fertilizers. Etc. Is
Precisely,
that what?
precisely. See, you can import organic fertilizer from anywhere, but first you have to prepare the nation, prepare the farming community that this is what it means, this is how we are going to do it, and none of these things were done. One day it was announced, then suddenly the pandemic came, there was a contraction in the economy. Then came the Chinese shipload of Chinese organic fertilizer. That was expected to be cleared by the local agro scientists, government agro scientists. They said it was of poor quality for local use. That created panic among the farmers. That was one thing. Even if that was not reported, I don't think the present generation of farmers in any of the South Asian countries know how to handle organic farming without pre-education. And that was
But
that would
did
have
this
been
mean that
disaster
production,
anyway.
agricultural production completely broke down? Is that what happened?
Precisely, agriculture production, particularly tea production,
I see. Well,
which
that
is
is
the
the
major
backbone of the
export commodity.
economy.
Precisely. Not only that, this government also banned the import of many other items, saying that we want to promote the domestic product. For instance, turmeric, which is a everyday item in every South Asian meal, cutting across nations and boundaries. That was used to go from Tamil Nadu, India, and that import was also banned overnight. And there used to be smuggling from Tamil Nadu there, like many other products, because the government did not plan it in a way, because the local farmers were not ready to replace the imported turmeric overnight. That doesn't happen that way.
So it's not that the government was inactive or unconscious of this. They were trying to bring in reforms which also misfired. So where is the problem? Is that the problem of not having sufficient experts on the economy who did not take care of the repayment, liabilities, the inflation, and all this? This took a long time. So how come they were not able to stop this at some stage? Was it because of corruption also? Or is it because of the dynasty?
Corruption may have played a part, which happens in almost every country in one form or other, whether they are democracies, capitalist, communist, or whatever. That is beside the point here. But basically, the political master took decisions, and the economists of the government who should have guided them and who should have put their foot down, they did not seem to have done it throughout the career of the Sri Lankan government over the past 30, 40 years, independent of who was the president and which party was in power. So, as I said, it's a legacy issue, and the nation had got comfortable living beyond the means. And as some official there told me long time ago, who cares who is going to repay the loan? Today they had to win elections, and that's it.
The successors
That
will
seems
pay
to
the
have been
loan.
the attitude with every government there. Yes. But unfortunately, in this case, if Mahinda had done it or his predecessors had done it, one of them, Gota, is back in power. When all this crisis happened, still they would have been able to pass on this burden to a future generation of politicians, political leadership, but for the pandemic.
So this is a lesson for every government in the world. You cannot survive by taking money as loans from abroad and then transfer it to another generation. If you do that, your own generation might collapse. That's what happened in Sri Lanka.
That's what has happened. Precisely. Every government in every country has to learn a lesson from this. You can't live beyond your means. Even if you are going to borrow, there has to be a limitation and limit, and with some idea as to how you can repay it. If you go back in time a few years back, when Sri Lanka borrowed money from China for the Hambantota project as part of the BRI or whatever, there were concerns within Sri Lanka and outside. How are they going to repay? Because there was going by expert advice from across the world, Hambantota port won't make money the way it should be to repay the loan, and it may not at all recover the cost in the foreseeable future. Still, they went about buying it, taking the loans. But as we saw, within 5 years, the successor government had to hand over the territory, a part of Sri Lankan territory and sovereignty to China as part of to repay the loan on a 99-year-old lease. That kind of facility is no more available.
No, but does that mean when they gave that 99% lease, did their obligation to pay back the Hambantota costs finish? Or that also remain?
No. That is finished.
So no more money to be paid on account of Hambantota because they have given Hambantota itself.
Precisely. They may get some share, but that is it.
But isn't there another port being built in Colombo itself by the Chinese?
No, that's there are a few other development projects. That is, one is Colombo Port City. That is a financial city. It is that kind of thing that is being built. That is for financial and monetary affairs. They like banking, etc. See, they wanted to develop Sri Lanka as a hub for various specifics, including banking, international banking, etc. Like Singapore and Dubai have developed. Their calculation at one time was they would, those two cities would outgrow themselves and necessarily they will have to move out. And Sri Lanka should provide the facility. That is how they started it. But possibly because of the pandemic, all this crisis, it is going to be delayed, if not given up for good. Then there is the Colombo port terminal projects. One terminal is being done by already with China. The other Eastern Container Terminal that was to come to India under a trilateral agreement with Japan was withdrawn by Sri Lanka with this government. But they have handed over the Western Container Terminal to India's Adani Group with partners, with the Sri Lankan Port Authority and a local private entrepreneur.
And that is under criticism. They are saying that Adani was brought from the back door through India. Is that true? There is a criticism like that?
See, that is what the political opposition in Sri Lanka, the SJB party of opposition leader Sajid Premadasa has been saying. These are things they have to tackle with their government. They can go to their courts. their Supreme Court is relatively independent of political influence in such matters. That is, they have to make a case out there and not make sweeping statement that challenges the credibility of not only foreign investors at this time of crisis, but also the government of India. And in fact, they have said negative things about the Adani's so-called relationship with the Prime Minister of India. So if
But
they
how
are
about the
going to
money?
continue
Where,
like
where is
this,
the money coming
no
from for the
foreign
Adani
investor,
project?
Indian or foreign, would want to come. Yes?
What is the money? Where is the money coming for Adani project? Is it a loan or is it an investment?
No, Adanis are direct investors.
I see. So that doesn't affect
Adanis are
the
direct.
payment liabilities.
No. I think they are going to be there on the individual project for a particular number of years against certain terms and conditions that their recovery of costs, etc. That's a commercial deal, purely commercial deal. The
Yes,
question of the
but
surrendering
the
land
Chinese
or
don't do
property
that
or
at all.
territory doesn't affect.
Chinese give it as kind of long-term soft loans and try to capture politically influence in the countries. That is the BRI philosophy, isn't it?
No,
They
this is
don't,
not
they don't
BRI
invest.
philosophy. This is purely a commercial deal where you invest.
Adani's is, but the BRI projects
Money,
are not commercial deals.
No, all commercial deals, if you look at it, are the same principle. BRIs also belong there, but not the way it was done on projects that were not economical or where the term is to surrender your property, that you pay back in kind, not in cash. I don't think the Adani or any other investor scheme will involve that kind of repayment schedule, repayment mode rather.
And this $1 billion that India gave as credit line, where will that go?
So this is a soft loan India has given in terms of it will go as commodities, rice, wheat, medicines.
So they are able to
Everything that
import
Sri
them
Lanka is
from us.
importing now.
They are able to
Right?
import them from India under this credit line.
Precisely.
But that's also a debt. That's also will add to
Yes.
the debt.
No. If you look at that, everything that they are going to take is debt. IMF is a debt. But between friendly nations, you cannot avoid it. See, what happened to us in 1991? We faced a huge forex crisis. So how did we manage? But there was one thing we had a manufacturing base. All that we have to do is to ease the restriction for foreign investors. Then people could come in. In Sri Lanka, there is a political opposition to this. Even in India at that time, there was a part of it. But the government of the day, where Prime Minister Narasimha Rao could build a consensus on the need for economic reforms. But in Sri Lanka, whoever is in government follows a particular pattern, and whoever is in the opposition now, they criticize it. For instance, the JB, who was a former ruling party, so to say, because their parent party UNP was in power for until 2-3 years back, and they aspire to replace the present government in the next election whenever held. But they are the ones who are opposing India. It is, Adani and the investments of India in Trincomalee oil tank farm, etc. But the problem here is they are also sending a wrong message to foreign investors, possibly other than China. And this party is a market economy oriented party, that is the SJB. So, what is the political logic here? I don't know. Economic logic here, I don't know. Politically, yes, they are taking on their domestic rival. That's a different thing, but they are confusing it with the economic policy of the Sri Lankan state as an entity.
Well, normally countries, when they face such difficulties, they go to the IMF or World Bank or Asian Development Bank, etc. But Sri Lanka preferred to go to countries rather than to the international organizations. This is supposed to be because the IMF and others have conditionalities to their assistance. They will demand elimination of corruption, they will demand better governance, and therefore Sri Lanka did not want to go there. Now, of course, they have gone there. But they thought that they could get loans from China and India, which would leave them independent to do whatever they wanted to do with the governance matters. Is that true? Is that the reason why they have been shying away from going to the IMF?
So that is one way of looking at it. Governance issue, corruption, and all are part of the game in any political dispensation, wherever they are. This ruling party is ideologically left of center still, and their constituency is basically the poor and the downtrodden and the rural population.
But they are making them poorer.
Yes?
They are making them poorer in the process of their policies.
No. The problem there is when IMF comes and lays down conditionalities, it takes away it targets the welfare measures of the government. And two, every government, no leader or administrator would say it so openly. They are concerned about a particular issue. As you would recall, in the 60s, there was a left militant movement called JVP. When the LTT came out with the ethnic issue 20 years later, that pushed the JVP back from the limelight of international observers. But basically, the Sri Lankan state as an institution has not got over the shock and surprise of left militancy, which is triggered by the poorer and rural sections of the population. So when they go to IMF and the conditionalities mean that people are going to be poorer, they are a little wary of going that way. And that is also, in this case, the constituency of this government and this leadership. So they were doubly wary. But sooner than later, they seem to have understood what India and China can give is only in short-term loans, commodity loans, and all that. But beyond that, they need to shore up their forex reserves, at least until tourism and inward remittances improve. That means only IMF is the source.
Yeah, but then how will they meet the situation? Because IMF's projection, according to the report that came out yesterday, is that till 2026, from 22 to 26, the repayment responsibility will be as much as 64% of the GDP.
Yes.
So
it is not going to be easy. I don't think anyone is given serious thought to it for the simple reason they are living from hand to mouth today. So only when IMF money comes in, someone can sit back, relax, and think in terms of repayment. Right. I don't think it is going to be that easy until the situation improves on the tourism, export-import, etc., and inward remittances. I don't think they can afford to think even in terms of repaying $1.
No, but in the case of China, there is no such exemptions. They will insist on that payment, even in the current situation.
So I don't know this time.
There is some kind of restructuring. When a friendly country is in trouble, you are supposed to do some kind of restructuring of debts.
No. That is what they have been They have been talking about, demanding, requesting for restructuring of the loan. Ultimately, nations have to accept if you have to get back your money in some form someday, it has to be the form of restructuring of the loan.
No, so that means since IMF money is basically American money and rich countries' money, they are probably in a better position to be lenient towards these countries rather than individual countries like China or India.
That is true. But IMF conditionalities come before their leniency.
So that ideological problem they have, they don't want to be identified with the rich man's ideas.
That used to be the case, but now now, before and after IMF, the situation seems to be the same. Already there is stark poverty in the rural areas. People are fleeing from that country to India. That is, of course, the Tamils. That is a totally different background. We will have to see what it is all about. But overall, this is a situation. People will rather have some money in their pocket and some jobs to have This is where Indian investments can make a difference compared to Chinese investment.
And
Whether
is
it
it
is
also
Adani
true
or the Government
because
of India project, if they are going to hire locals, that is going to get some money into the pockets of individuals and families. They have been deprived of it for nearly 15 years now. That's a long time.
right? No, but when these loans are taken, if the investment or utilization is done in infrastructure projects which do not create profit, create income, is that one of the reasons why these loans have caused so much problem for Sri Lanka? I'm just thinking in terms of the example of Kerala, you must be aware of. Kerala has institutionalized borrowing for money for infrastructure. And we now have
Yes.
this huge issue of the K line or the silver line for which 1 lakh crores of rupees are required. And all this money we are going to get. But how do you repay that? Because there'll be no income from the railway line or the profit will not be there. And therefore, the debt trap will come here also, don't you think?
Definitely, yes. Even in the case of Sri Lanka, for instance, as I said, there is no manufacturing sector for them to import things, export things. See, for instance, with the economic reforms, India, for instance, brought in a lot of investment in the automobile sector, where it had already had some base, and such other sectors where there was re-import, and the local market could sustain the manufactured goods. That also was happening alongside thanks to IT revolution and such other developments. In Sri Lanka, this is going to be a grave concern. If you look at the repayment, who is going to repay? More than that, how are they going to repay? So tourism and inward remittances and such other thing, there is a limitation for them to pump in money. Tourists bring in money. Inward remittances is again only for local consumption. So on forest basis you can show, but someone somewhere has to print money to replace it for the local consumer. So that is also going to increase the deficit in financing of the government. This is a very complex area which I don't think anyone is in the mood to look at it right now. None of them was in the mood to look at it in the past, over 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe now that the crisis has hit them hard, as President Gotabaya Rajapaksa convened a all-party meeting to discuss this issue 2 days back. So most of the parties abstained because it's politically suitable for them to do so. There has to be a national consensus, as happened in India of 1990-91, to take things forward. Without that, if you are going to resort to blame game all over again, the country can never get out of this self-imposed economic trap. I won't even say debt trap. It is much more than a debt trap. The trap is only a part of it. Whether it is China driven or someone else driven by IMF or India or whoever.
No, but when you
There
come
must
to
be
the case of the states in
on
India,
an economic policy.
you also understand the situation in India. In the case of states which overborrow or do things like this, there is always a restraint on the part of the central government to make sure
Yes.
that these debts do not increase beyond a point. And that may
Yes.
be a saving grace or a kind of exit point for the states. So we may not be as vulnerable to the situation as Sri Lanka is today, because we have an overseeing authority which looks after loans from abroad with a very keen sense of the economics of it.
See, that's a difference. Sri Lanka, it is the central government that is borrowing. And that is indebting the nation into. Whereas in India, the central government, as an institution independent of the political leadership or bureaucratic leadership, the faithless aspect of the central governments ensure that there is the deficit doesn't go beyond a point, the debt does not hit the ceiling, etc., etc. That kind of self-discipline or a constitutional mandate is not being followed with the same seriousness in other countries, particularly Sri Lanka.
But the fundamental lesson then is that investment in infrastructure with borrowed money to make the people feel happy for the moment may harm them in the long run. That is the lesson I think we have to learn from the Sri Lanka experience.
Precisely. Yes. You cannot live on other people's, you can't live your dreams with borrowed money.
Right. And when the IMF comes, hopefully when it comes, they will give them money, and then they will have to make changes in the system which may affect these individuals themselves. Their corruption may be brought out. So a certain amount of cleaning up operation will take place. And that will have a political implication. Is the opposition getting ready for that battle?
See, there are two things. One, I don't expect the IMF cleaning up operation to rid any government of corruption completely.
History doesn't show that. History
there
doesn't.
There will be some cosmetic changes initially. The Sri Lanka as a nation and individuals may be prepared to accept it given the current condition. But on political terms, there are two things. One, the successor government, if it is not a Rajapaksa government or if it is not that of their party, SLPP, can always blame. See, I am not to blame. My predecessor trapped me into this. Just as everyone is talking about Chinese the trap, I am a trap will become a political slogan. But they also have to come up with an economic model that can sustain the nation and sustain their credibility and popularity. That's not going to be easy. As of now, the presidential elections are not due before 2024. What India has done or what China may be doing or what IMF may be doing may bring some relief to the Sri Lankan population. They are not going to easily forget the present rulers as much as they have forgotten the previous rulers when the elections come. But there is every possibility that if the political opposition is not able to come up with a credible action plan that is different from what the present government may come up with after the IMF regime comes to play, they may be in deeper trouble than they think the Rajapaksas are in electoral terms.
But is there a powerful opposition?
A known devil is better than the unknown angel.
Is there a figure, an opposition figure who can command respect and also take on these responsibilities? Is there someone like that?
See, Sajid Premadasa is the leader of the political opposition. Yes. He has already declared that he will be the presidential candidate. Maybe his party will nominate him and his alliance partners will accept it. But the elections are too far away for us to jump to a conclusion because the constitution provides for 50% vote share in the first round. Or there is a scheme for that. Gotabaya Rajapaksa got about 58% against Sajid Premadasa, 41-42% last time. That 42% comprised mostly the minority votes, say about 12 to 15% were that of the Muslims and the Tamils. And today the president is talking to the Tamil National Alliance to drive for a political resolution. This does not mean that is going to bring them all the Tamil votes that has been denied to the Rajapaksas over the last 15 years of elections. But it can still soften the situation for the Tamil community. So individuals may start voting instead of a collective political decision as has been the case earlier. In the south, again, that is the Singhala constituency. And the present urban voters of the rival SJP, they are more conscious about the economic difficulties. Rather, they are as conscious as the economic difficulties as they are opposed to the Rajapaksas. But for that constituency, the SJP has to come up with a credible economic action plan. One of their leading economist parliamentarians, Harshad De Silva, has said that we are working on a blueprint. I don't know why, if the blueprint is going to be on, Why can't they share with this government? Because why should they wait for another 2-3 years to undo what harm they think this present government is doing and try to revisit it and reverse it? That may not happen that way. There are only certain limited.
No, but Satyamurthy, it may happen that the good things out of IMF, etc., may actually come nearer the elections at a point when the people get some relief. And therefore, regardless of the payment schedules and responsibilities, people may feel happy with the Rajapakshes, 3 of them, and may even vote for them. That can also happen.
That is precisely what I'm saying. See, India is supplying commodities. Yes, they have stopped. They have stood in long queues for oil, milk powder, bun, bread, everything. Whatever is available, as they used to say about the old East Europe. They have gone through all this in the last 6 to 8 months. So whatever relief they get from India or China or IMF, they would say these people are managed. So
it may come to their benefit. They may benefit from this.
At the end of the day, elections are 2.5 years away. Unless the government, the opposition is able to topple the Prime Minister in Parliament, then again they may form a government, but they have to share the responsibility. And the Constitution provides for the President to be the head of state, head of government, and head of the cabinet. So there may be cohabitation issues. I'm looking at the extreme possibilities, but no elections, right? So that can only make the alternate prime minister from the opposition as unpopular as they want the present government to be. So elections are as open as you suggest, than being a closed chapter as up today.
Right. Is there any discrimination against Tamils, particularly in this context? Because some refugees who have arrived in India are all Tamils. So does it mean that this situation has affected the Tamils in a discriminatory manner, that the Sinhalese have better benefits or what? Or is it only because Tamils are attracted to go to India, they are coming to India? Is there a discrimination in the treatment of the two communities?
See, we have to really look at why these refugees came, how they paid for the boat trip. It doesn't come cheap. And they say they didn't have money and they have still gone to pay for the boats. No one said they had a free ride. That is one thing. But unfortunately, throughout this crisis, very few Tamil politicians or parties have talked about the economic crisis, either at the individual level or the ethnic level or at the national level. To be fair to him, the opposition TNA, Tamil National Alliance parliamentarian, M.A. Sumandran was the only opposition leader from whichever community who got together all the opposition leaders, including some of the government parties, for 2 meetings, and they came up with a short note for the president to act upon. Others were all talking there. This man at least tried to, though he is not a great economist by any such of imagination, he tried to put together an action plan which they should have followed up because SJP, for instance, has got economists, UNB has got economists, Tamils may have economists, but they haven't come out so very openly. They should have come up with an alternate action plan. That is not happening. Or they should have attended the all-party conference which Gotabaya Rajapaksa convened belatedly. He should have done it at least 6-8 months earlier. But when all was lost, he called this meeting. And then, at least that happened earlier this week, they should have shared their not only concern but also their suggestions. That has not happened.
But so, a political settlement.
Tamil, unfortunately, going back to your basic question, Tamil political leaders are still talking only about political solution and
13th Amendment.
Perhaps not based on economic benefits. Right? That's unfortunate.
Right, but in any case, as far as this political settlement is concerned, it is not in the near future. Sri Lankans have given that up. They say we are all the same Sri Lankans and no minorities, that kind of approach. Is it making any headway?
No, that President Gota also used to say until recently. Yesterday, for the first time after coming to power, he has met with the TNA parliamentarians, at least a group of them, saying that I am ready to look at some of the specific concerns of yours regarding land grab by the state institutions in Tamil areas, the disappearances, disappeared Tamils during the war and before and after, and political prisoners. There are about 100 or 200 Tamil political prisoners languishing for years now, and all the specifics. As for a political solution, he has said that we will wait for a constitutional. They are planning to frame a new constitution, which was a part of his electoral agenda in 2019. A committee was set up. It heard opinions from everyone, including the TNA, and they have. He has told them yesterday, according to news reports, that the report should be ready in 2 months. Then at that stage, I will discuss the political solution with you people.
Right. And in any case, the situation has deteriorated to such an extent. And we know that there is a certain amount of rivalry between China and India in helping Sri Lanka. This situation, have the Chinese done anything special for Sri Lanka to retain their primary position in Sri Lanka, or is India competing with it to be more helpful? What is your reading?
Personally, I would think that through the past months, what India has done has brought Sri Lanka to equidistant between China and India. Earlier, there was a strong perception in India, for right reasons and wrong, that Sri Lanka has moved far away from India and into the China camp, as if it was a client state of China. But that perception has been wiped out now. One. Two, through this period, beginning with 2020, there has been a quiet improvement on the geostrategic cooperation between India and Sri Lanka. Along with Maldives, the three nations created the Colombo Conclave, where the NSS met in November 2020 and upgraded their maritime security arrangement into a maritime and security agreement, implying that it is bigger and faster than the previous one. They have now included taken Mauritius on board at the Maldives Conclave a few weeks back, and Bangladesh and Seychelles have also signed up as observers. So, what India needed as guarantees on the security front slowly seem to be happening. If you recall, Ambassador, India did not seem to have any problem with Sri Lanka going to China for developmental funding. When they went, even 10 years back, India did not have that kind of cushion to support neighbors at will. Today, India is in a better position. So, India is also putting money. And there is a difference. And the Chinese ambassador earlier this week announced another $2.5 billion of aid to Sri Lanka, which is in a way good. But all the Chinese assistance in the past few months after the crisis hit is in terms of cash or such other facility, not investments. Whereas Indian investment is going there. Indian investment means also jobs and incomes. India is also providing cash cushion, commodity and fuel credit and all that. So there is a change in the characterization of the debt Sri Lanka is going to incur or incurring now between China and India. How they travel the coming months and years will decide where they are heading.
Well, so that's a good news about this whole situation. That is, we have become more or less, or Sri Lanka has become equidistant between China and India rather than sold to China as it was earlier. And is that in that context that Mr. Jaishankar is visiting Colombo?
I think so. See, it is a process. The good thing about the entire last 2 years of pandemic, etc., India's interaction with neighbors has increased by leaps and bounds for a variety of reasons. That includes
The
Sri Lanka
vaccine
and Maldives in the
diplomacy.
Indian
The
Ocean.
vaccine diplomacy.
It started with the
Vaccine
vaccine
diplomacy.
diplomacy, but it has not ended there. Right? Even now, Sri Lankans will know that India supplied vaccine to its neighbors even before meeting the needs of the local population. One.
Right.
Today, not that India is in a position, particularly after the Ukraine war, the fuel prices, the fuel market, fuel imports are all in a jeopardy across the world. At the same time, taking that risk, bearing the risk itself, India is supplying fuel to Sri Lanka. This, I think, average Sri Lankans will understand and react accordingly.
So they will not be critical of India buying oil from Russia at this point. They will also benefit.
They are not concerned about who buys oil from whom. It's not their battle. They are fighting for their lives and livelihoods.
But the fuel prices.
Sri Lanka is a friend of Russia. They are not opposed to Russia. Like India, they are playing their balancing game.
But the fuel price increase in Sri Lanka is also due to the Ukraine crisis, do you think?
No. The crisis, fuel crisis was part of the forex crisis that happened, that began months ago. Maybe
but now the prices are gone up. If you have to buy more from any source, you buy oil now, the price will be higher. That, of course, the implication.
That is true. But Sri Lanka, imagine a situation, even if you had a forex reserves, it would have to pay a higher price. Today, they don't have fuel, leave alone forex. So if someone is going to pay you at the market price or whatever it is they agree upon, the two governments agree upon, we wouldn't know clearly. They should be happy for the availability of fuel and whoever is making it available. India didn't say, no, we are facing a crisis, we don't know the market conditions and stop from supplying. See, India's neighborhood policy is really coming into full play in Sri Lanka than in any other country just now.
And it is making an impact.
That should make an impact. How we also move forward, how we take it forward, all matters. But of course, as you rightly pointed out earlier, there is a section in Sri Lanka also that is not exactly favorably disposed to these India deals. But I would think that it is a reflection on their domestic politics rather than their antipathy or animosity towards India. Of course, JVP as the leading one-time militant party, they have got a problem with India, but not the SJP in principle. But they are seeing it only through the eye of their political situation on the domestic front. I think they have to grow beyond that if they have to come to power and sustain neighborhood relations, sustain foreign policy, sustain their own economic policy and interdependence. Because it is becoming increasingly clear that Sri Lanka as an economy or other neighbors have to do more business with India if they have to sustain their economy.
But you may digress a little bit to Maldives, which also you know very well. There is this anti-Indian demonstrations, etc., taking place in Maldives. How serious are they?
As a protest, I won't say they are very serious, but definitely coming from that segment of the politicians that they are, we have to be concerned because if this political party, that is that of the former President Yami, who have launched the India Out campaign and made it a single point agenda for them through the past 1 year or so, they are pitching it to come to power. Should they come to power in the presidential election later next year, then there will be trouble. But I think
why choose India? Why choose India as a target? Is there a general sentiment against India which they are exploiting?
No, they are trying to create a general sentiment against India.
Right.
I won't say there is a pre-existing sentiment against India per se, because every Maldivian knows that India has come to their rescue during COVID, even post-COVID. In all the investment there are now in infrastructure and social infrastructure and otherwise are from India. And more importantly, on a daily basis, most of the consumables for Maldivians go from India. As you know, Maldives is an archipelago nation spread across 900 kilometers or so, where nothing much grows. And they have a huge shortage of every resource, starting with human resources. So, they even if they make money, they will still have to depend on imported labor. Already they about 100,000 labor there are from other South Asian nations, particularly Bangladesh and India. And a lot of products that they consume on a daily basis, rice, wheat, medicine, stationery, you name it, and it would have gone from India. As a Maldivian friend used to say, if a Tuticorin port is shut down for 1 week, we will be panicking.
Well, the mention of stationery reminded me of this crisis about paper and ink. I don't think even during the world wars one heard about such kind of shortage, which necessitated postponement of examinations. What is the secret of that?
Simple. It's the import economy, and they did not provide for such thing. See, everything that comes out comes to Sri Lankan or Maldivian or any table in the neighborhood.
It just happened that they ran out of stocks.
Precisely. And there is no forest to pay for imports. When containers, loads of more important commodities, critical commodities, including medicines and oil tankers, are waiting outside for non-availability of forest to pay for, stationery and examinations have to wait.
So, what is your prediction? Is it like Ukraine war that nobody can say what will happen, or is there some kind of
There is light at the end of the tunnel, I would say.
Light at the end of the tunnel. But how long is the tunnel?
No, I will say because now that India has stepped in with aid in commodities and it has got an arrangement for 7 months of fuel supply or plus and other things. And China may also be chipping with cash and other credit lines. There is immediate relief for Sri Lanka for the next 6 months. How they manage it and how they visualize and plan for the coming months and years, that is where the beginning is.
But immediately you don't expect
they can hope to get the IMF credit line. So how they manage the economy from now on, how harsh are they on their population and themselves, will dictate how much of tight belting they are ready to undergo, will determine the course of the recovery of the economy. Their economy may not recover tomorrow or day after tomorrow. But as I mentioned earlier, the population can breathe a sigh of relief that tomorrow I may not have to go and stand in the queue. Maybe day after tomorrow, 2 days later, 5 days later, he is not so sure. How the government
how about the possibility of flow of refugees to India? Is that a possibility?
I don't think so.
Because today the government is supposed to take a decision whether these people should be treated as refugees or simply illegals. That decision is going to be taken by the government of India today, I believe.
Yes.
So will that make any difference?
Basically, I don't think will be a huge inflow or influx of economic refugees from Sri Lanka as much as may be anticipated unless someone is behind it doing these things for other reasons. That is my conclusion.
You mean ethnic reasons?
Maybe yes.
Okay. Anyway, the good point that we note is that India is doing well in the circumstances and perhaps doing even better than China. That seems to be the only silver lining in this dark cloud which is enveloping Sri Lanka. Let's hope and pray that things will get back to normal. Thank you very much, Mr. Moorthy, for joining me today to have this very fruitful, very knowledgeable, informative discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.